welcome everybody. Welcome, thank you so much for coming to Contemplation Conversations. This event is hosted by the Contemplative Studies Centre at the University of Melbourne. Thanks for joining us at this important event. And I would like to, before we get underway, to acknowledge the Wiradjuri people who are the traditional custodians of the land we're meeting on, and to respect our elders past and present, and also to acknowledge any Indigenous guests joining us today, including Joe, who's going to be one of our panellists. And for those of you who I haven't met, my name's Sophie Scott. I was the medical reporter for the ABC for a long time, and now I'm a speaker and writer on mental health and wellbeing. And I'm also on the board of the Contemplative Studies Centre. So thank you for being at this event. And we're going to be joined by a wonderful panel of speakers. I'll introduce them all. And you will also have, I'll be up here asking questions, but you'll also have the opportunity to ask questions as well. So it's not just about me hogging the questions. So while you're listening to our fantastic speakers, be thinking about questions that you might have for them, and they'll be sure to answer them at the last part of our event. So our panellist over here, we've got Dr. Grant Blashki. He's a general practitioner and the lead clinical advisor for Beyond Blue. He's also an associate professor at the Nossal Institute, focusing on primary mental health care, climate change and health, and public health communication. He has edited 9 books, 140 peer-reviewed papers, and he's very often in the media talking about mental health and public health. Give him a big round of applause. And he has a little surprise for us later. If you're a good audience, are you a good audience? Yeah. Okay, if you're a good audience, he's got a little surprise. So next we have Dr. Susan Carland. She's an academic and writer, and she's the director of the Bachelor of Global Studies at Monash University. And she's written work such as Fighting Islam, and she's also the co-author of The Research Process and a recognised thought leader. She's presented at the UN in Geneva. She was named in the 500 most influential Muslims list, and she hosts a great podcast called What Happens Next. So give her a big round of applause. Then next to me we have Adjunct Associate Professor Joe Williams, who's a Wiradjuri Wulgalu Aboriginal man, former NRL player, and WBF World Junior Welterweight Champion. He's now shifted his focus to mental health advocacy, and I just found out today, he's also doing a PhD, so he's got some interesting things, and he's going to talk a little bit about that as well. And he now hosts and conducts workshops, and he shares his insights on resilience, addiction, emotional well-being, and trauma healing in a range of settings. He's also does a lot of work with young people as well. So give Joe a big round of applause. And I thought we might just do a quick definition of the term contemplative practice. Hands up in the audience who knows what that means. Come on, it must be more than Nicholas. There you go. There's a few of you. Well, the working definition is that contemplative practices involved focused activities such as meditation, prayer, or purposeful movement, which fosters meaning, transformation, and connection. And while the practices can be rooted in religious traditions, they now extend beyond that, and they can find applications in health, productivity, and education. So I love that definition. I think it just shows how broad the application of contemplative practices really can be. I'll just do a little bit of housekeeping, and everyone can just grab out your phones and pop them on silent for me. That would be great. And if you are on social media, you can see up here, you can follow the centre is on Twitter, and all the panellists and myself, we're all on Instagram. So if you're on Instagram, we'd love you to follow all of us and take some photos and put some of your thoughts on Instagram. And also Amy from the centre will be live tweeting the event as well if you're on Twitter/X or whatever they call it these days. As I said, we're going to be having your questions at the end of the discussion, so please be thinking about what you would like to ask our amazing panel. The event is going to be recorded, and we'll be putting it out later so you can watch it again. So I want to start each of the panellists just by asking them, we live in a very busy age these days. How do you commit to contemplative practices in an age where most of us and a lot of us want a quick fix. Grant, I'll start with you.
Thank you so much. And I had a joke when I was coming here, and we're all not allowed to really have a sense of humour, but I was telling my kids that I'm coming in, and it goes something like, a Jew, a Muslim and an Aboriginal came to a gallery. That's pretty much the end of the joke. It sounds like one of those sort of jokes that you hear, but then I was thinking, we live in a beautiful, civilised country here, and I really enjoyed your recent podcast, and there's a lot of, elephants in the room and upset at the moment about a lot of things for a lot of people, and I think it's real testament and awesome that we actually get together. But anyway, that's my tiny note there. Like, you were looking at me like, where's this joke going to go, Grant? But I do think that that's lovely. Anyway, how do I try and keep my sense of equanimity and...
Particularly when people are looking for a quick fix.
Yeah. For me, it's daily routines. And my wife thinks it's quite funny, and all of us are born with different levels of, I guess, sort of mental calmness. She wakes up and just looks at the tree, and I'm awake and I'm like, right, what, So by the time I've done Tai Chi, a prayer, a meditate, and she's still just waking up. It's like, okay, you're right there? Are you ready yet? So I actually really enjoy those beautiful contemplative practices in the morning.
And Susan, one thing I wanted to ask you is how important is it that we devote the time and a substantial amount of time of our investment into contemplative practice?
Thank you. I don't have a joke to start with. You'll be happy to hear. I think with the contemplative practices that I adopt are ones that are informed by my religious tradition. So Muslims pray 5 times a day. So there is that. We fast Ramadan, which is a month for 30 days. We fast all food and water from sunrise to sunset. So we have these contemplative practices built in to punctuate all our time, our day, our year, our life. There are all these processes. And they're put in there to... the way we sort of think about it is like we are constantly checking our map. 5 times throughout the day, I'm constantly looking at my map and going, am I going in the direction that I want to be? Am I being the person that I want to be? Am I getting so distracted by the busyness of this life that I'm getting off course? So, I think it's interesting when we talk about things like mindfulness, which is, often used as a synonym for contemplative practices, because I think we should ask the question, when we talk about mindfulness, what is our mind full of? When we do mindful practices, what are we filling our minds with? And I think, I can only speak about it from my own tradition, but I think we need to be very careful that when we engage in contemplative practices or mindful practices, that we don't just engage in navel gazing, that we're not just rotating around ourselves, but actually doing the necessary hard inner discipline work that these practices are supposed to engender. It's not meant to just be, I don't think, meant to be about a self-focus and a self-aggrandizement. It's actually, the acts are meant to take us to a better place, to be more beneficial to the world that we are in, and take us to a better level of consciousness.
And Jo, how important is the concept of slowing down for you as a contemplative practice?
I'm someone who has to do it constantly because my mind goes 1,000,001 miles an hour with 1,000,001 different voices in it. So I'm somebody who constantly has to remind myself what it is to slow down. And it's those morning things that I'm really lucky that I spent 10 years in Sydney when I was playing footy down there, and I couldn't wait to get home, back to the bush. I'm a bush boy and I'm a country boy, so the benefits of living in the country where you can hear the birds of a morning and everything just slows down a hell of a lot more. I also reflect on as a Wiradjuri Wagala man, our practices for thousands of years have always been that. If we talk about the oldest existence of humankind, documented humankind, started with our people have been doing this for thousands of years. They're just all renamed now. I checked a lecturer I had at Wollongong Uni, and she said, it's great for, around trauma healing and consciousness of to be in the present and to do mindfulness, and they even said earthing. I was like, what's earthing? And she said, when you take your shoes off.
Like grounding, putting your feet on.
And I was like, they're all just new labels for what our people did for thousands of years. Like, we didn't have shoes. We had no choice. Right? But there's so much in it, and the documentation now around it and the research around it is just so vast that what we did for thousands and thousands of years worked. The way that we're living now in a modern society of everything that we see outside here is just so chaotic. One, not for everything that's external to us, but that's exactly how our mind is working. The minute we all open our eyes, the minute everything just starts to go a million miles an hour, is because that's the world that we live. I think we need to remind ourselves, and that, it's a beautiful way you put it, that map, the constant reminder of what you do and the purpose in what you do and how you do it is just so important in the world that we live that's so chaotic.
Exactly. And I wanted each of you to just tell us a little bit more, in a little bit more detail, about your own contemplative practice and how it's impacted your life. Grant, we'll start again with you. You mentioned your morning routine, but can you take us through a little bit of what you do and what impact it's had and why you keep doing it?
First of all, just a comment. For me, I love astronomy, and I love this idea of watching the stars go by, and I find that very grounding. And to your point, Joe, I'm reading this beautiful book at the moment that explained how much Aboriginal people knew about astronomy. Because we date a lot of our astronomy knowledge like it was Galileo in Europe and Copernicus and all that. But it was absolutely extraordinary, this book that I found.
Words are important. Know about astrology. We still know it. It's not that we knew it. We still know it.
Yeah.
That's important.
Yeah, and it was amazing. It was like when this star's here, the dolphins come out, and it was just extraordinary. Anyway, so that point is about connection and connection to these natural rhythms of nature, and that's very important to me. Tai Chi, I had a inner ear problem about 12 years ago. It completely knocked the hell out of me. I didn't work for 2 years. So I did Tai Chi up the road here at Melbourne University with this beautiful Tai Chi teacher who I still have lessons from, even though she's in Sydney. We do Zoom, and I was doing it just to get my balance. And then, surprise, surprise, I found it the most calming thing. So when I started working for Beyond Blue, I had to do a bit of a scary interview, and the media person's going, right, you got all your notes? Like, no, just don't talk to me. I'm just going to do this. and I'm just getting my rhythm right. And she's like,
Of course.
who have we employed? But what I've learned and read a bit more about it is embodied cognition and those beautiful slow rhythms of my body. It
They
works
slow
the other
everything down.
way. It slows my mind down. And then I find I have this stillness. So that's that. And one last thing, I'm 7th generation Australian Jewish, and I still do my morning prayer, and there's a process where we wrap a thing called tefillin. It's like a little box, and I wrap it around me. I'm a bit of a mix because I'm a lot of ways an atheist and Big Bang and quantum physics, and I'm not sold on a magic fairy that is actually watching me. I don't want to be disparaging for me, but there's a bit of me, I live with the paradox, that still loves it, especially when we've had children and grandchildren. I'm like, wow, it's miraculous. So I'm a bet each way, and either way, I find the blessings of repeating things that are 5,000-year-old. We're late starters compared to you, Joe. I find that beautiful, and I love being connected to those ancient ideas.
Thank you for sharing. Susan, you mentioned your daily check-ins, the 5 daily check-ins. Are there other practices you can share with us that you you do and why you do them, what they bring to your life?
Yeah, I think the 5 daily prayers would probably be the most profound in that they are punctuated throughout the days. They're not negotiable. They are a full body prayer, so it's mind, body, soul. Everything is engaged in the act. The whole self is in submission when we do it. And the not negotiable part is an important part of it, because I think there is a significance to the discipline of a contemplative or a spiritual practice, that there needs to be an aspect of it that you do it even when you don't feel like it, or when it feels boring, or when it feels hard,
Just
or
when
inconvenient.
it's easy or...
There is the discipline, and every spiritual tradition has this. They have this component within it that there is a significant growth in working against the ego in that sense. So that is very important, and it's this beautiful sort of dichotomy of it's quiet and it's peaceful and it's grounding, but it's also communal, and there are parts that are out loud, and it's old, and we all pray in the same language, so it's connective. So there is that, but then there are other, spiritual practices I do throughout the day. And like I mentioned, Ramadan, if you want to talk about a hard spiritual practice, fasting for a month is a hard one. And that's the difficulty is the point. It is, again, every spiritual tradition has this thing of doing a very difficult physical thing, because we realize the growth that comes on the other side of it. That it is, the difficulty is the vehicle that gets you to the growth. But then I have other things that aren't connected to my faith per se, but are really good in that I'm a scuba diver. And one thing I love about diving, I don't know if anyone here is any scuba divers? Okay. So when you're under the water, like it is the quiet, other than space, I imagine, is the quietest place you can be. You cannot hear anything except your breath. Nothing. Is all you can hear is your breath for the whole time that you are down there. You can't be on your phone.
You can't be distracted. You can't be mindlessly scrolling.
Yeah, exactly. It is one of the most profound in-the-moment experiences, because there is no real sound other than your breath and bubbles. And it feels like you're on another planet in terms of what you see, and it's physically immersive. Your whole body's there. So there is something in that too with this, so many of the mindful practices and contemplative practices we have are about bringing us back to the now. Not in the past, not in the future, just the one thing we all have any certainty of, which is right now. And so scuba diving, running is another one. When I'm running, you can't, for me, the mind can sort of wander when the body is busy, and I can't be really distracted by anything else. So I think there's something in those physical acts, those sort of pushing yourself physical acts, that I find quite meditative. Ironically, I find running meditative. Yeah.
And Jo, can you talk to the audience about contemplative practices versus Indigenous traditions? How do they fit together? You talked about the roots of what we're talking about now, having their roots in Indigenous traditions, but for you, do you see them as a continuation of the same thing, or they're completely, there are some elements of Indigenous practices that are not necessarily the same as contemplative practices?
I've got so much going through my head at the moment. I'll read that. One thing, our old practices, is that we never had one of these things, which every one of us lives at some point to a clock, right? So we wake up, we've got to have breakfast, and then we've got to have lunch. I've got to get that meeting by this time, and I've got to finish this deadline by this, right? Our people had things so simplistic where we woke up when we weren't tired anymore. We ate when we were hungry. We drank when we were thirsty. And we went to bed when we were tired. There was, I speak a lot about a guy who's had massive impact on my life, Uncle Paul Gordon. He talked to me about, it was some documentation, I can't quote exactly what one it was, but he said how some of the early people that were here that were documenting everything that we did, right, spoke about how the first people lived with purpose, so much to the point that they did things, they interacted with people for about 10% of the day, and the rest of that time was around building relationships with families. So they did, purposeful practice, whether it be going to get food or making tools or doing whatever else. They did things with purpose, and the rest of that time was built in the relationships with our young people and modelling to our young people. A lot of the biggest thing that I can say, and the biggest thing that speaks out to me the most, is that we never had the concept of time, and we did things that when we were needed, and I guess time only came in when slavery came in.
Yeah, it's so interesting.
But for us, we did things with purpose, and a lot of that stuff was around certain times of the year and following the patterns of the stars, as you said, and looking when certain flower was at bloom, that's when the certain fish were running, and all of the interaction and relationship with country had everything to do with our relationships of how we interacted with country. Now how it's impacted us today is that we've I can't say lost, I always say words are important. We haven't lost it. It was stolen from us around the knowledges of what those certain practices are. We've got to find what those are again.
And is that what you, just staying with you, Joe, is that what you want to talk about in your PhD, which is looking at healing and how Indigenous practices and how it helps people heal?
There's a brilliant quote, firstly a brilliant book, if people are readers, by Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah, which is What Happened to You. And in that book, he quotes, how ironic that the people that have been most marginalised throughout the world are the people that we'll turn to heal our modern woes. And I just connected so much with that because I look at what we did and how we did it for thousands of years and how there were no challenges with this. To the point that I was saying a minute ago, we never had mental health problems because our mind wasn't sick. It was our spirit that was sick, and why our spirit was sick is because we weren't in alignment with the things that we were purposefully meant to do. So looking at, and I guess without giving too much away, what the research is going to be doing is exposing it to everyone else. Right? What we did worked for thousands of years, and what we're doing now. And what we're doing now isn't working, and the impact of what it does to our body and what it does to our brain, and if things are doing positive work to our body and our brain, we're going to feel better, right?
Yeah.
So that's everyone that can have these certain practices, I'm not talking about the secret and sacred ones, but certain practices that we can all utilise in our life, which moves us away from that concept of time and more so that concept of presence.
Yeah.
I'll just to that, I was delivering a keynote at the Healing Our Spirit Worldwide conference, and I was working on this great topic for a long time. And that same fellow, he rang me the night before. I was working on it for about a month, and he rang me the night before, and he goes, "Oh, what are you speaking about at that conference?" And I said, "Well, how the past is gone. We can't do anything about the past, and there's no such thing as the future because anything beyond right now isn't a thing." And I said, "All we have is the present." And he goes, "Let me check you on something." He said, "We don't even have the present." And I was like, "What? Let's go there." He said, "We don't even have the present. We only have a moment of presence,
and
then it becomes the past." He said, so everything of how we need to heal, what we need to do, has already been done. We just need to reconnect to that and learn from that and implement it now.
Beautiful. I will look forward to hearing more about your PhD. It sounds amazing. So you mentioned time, and we started the discussion with talking about this busy society that we have, with people looking for a quick fix, and a big part of that is our reliance on and our engagement with technology for better or worse. Susan, as an academic, what are you seeing with your students, and what impact is technology having on them?
I see it with my students. I also have a 16-year-old and a 20-year-old, so I see the impact on them. But also, I think the effect seems to be more pronounced on young teens and teens and maybe early 20s, because they were the unfortunate guinea pigs that we just thrust into an untested reality and said, "Oh, this iPad should be fine. What could go wrong?" But I think it certainly extends beyond that. I think people in their 30s and 40s and 50s are struggling with these same issues. And I think, you know, technology is such a beast. I feel like the introduction of the smartphone and then social media on the smartphone, it was like we were just watching a toddler a baby crawling towards a loaded gun, and none of us did anything, and we all just we went along with it. And I think we are seeing now some of the profound problems that it has caused, but we seem incapable now of trying to undo it.
Back.
And I think part of the problem is that they are designed to be addictive. They are designed for us to never look away from them. And I'm sure everyone here who has a smartphone has found themselves looking at it without even realizing that they'd picked it up, and suddenly there they are on Instagram or TikTok or checking their email or Reddit or whatever it is. We do it without even thinking. And I think it causes a profound, you know, what you were saying about it's a spiritual sickness. It feels like a spiritual assault on who we are as people, because what we pay attention to becomes what defines us. And so when we are paying so much attention to what is by definition superficial and tapping into all the worst parts of our neurochemistry, the things that make us angry and agitated and jealous and worried
and feel less than the person you're looking at.
Yeah, all the, you know, the 7 deadly sins basically in your hand, that has to have an effect on us. And of course, we all can and do say, well, I'm going to use my phone less, and we, you know, have screen time apps and all these sort of things. But we are fighting a very difficult battle because, you know, our brains are wired to respond to these things. They are difficult to undo. And I don't think we should underestimate the damage that they are doing to us individually, but also socially. You know, I don't think it's a coincidence that the rise in loneliness in so many countries has come at the same time as the rise of these digital products and the apps that are on them. You know, countries like England now have a minister for loneliness. Like, this is a profound problem. And so I see that with my students, I see that with my kids, but I see it with myself and people my age as well. This is not just the young people on their TikTok. Like, this is something that is a problem for all of us, and I think we are downplaying at our peril.
And Grant, what do you think? You know, if we're having this conversation about contemplative practice, how does technology impact our quest for wanting to devote time to things like a contemplative practice?
So many good points. It's great when you're on a panel and you want to write down some of the points. I like that. What you pay attention to becomes what defines us. I mean, I think that's such a good point. Fiercely agree. There was a study, we've known in Australia that, you know, our rigorous studies are showing that population average mental health has been getting worse. And there was a study out just last week where they did a cohort analysis. So they said, okay, overall it's going down. Which generation's pulling it down on average? So they said, let's separate out the people born in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. And it was pretty clear that the millennials had the same sort of pattern of mental health trajectory as all the other generations, but it was all running quite a bit lower. So that particular study doesn't answer the question of why, but it tells you yes. And it's exactly what I see. You know, I was with a bunch of friends the other day and we were all trying to work out if any of our kids weren't seeing psychologists at the moment. You know, like, we've got this thing happening at the moment. And I agree with you. I mean, it's sort of the elephant in the room. Like, suddenly it started when the phone started, and Facebook and Twitter you could repost. And I think it's part of a couple of more general problems that goes a bit to what Joe talked about, which was we've lost track of organic time. So
yeah, can you talked about that now in our pre-chat about organic time versus the other sort of time.
So, I mean, a lot of us aren't involved closely to the land, and our sense of time is derived, I think, as Joe very well put it, from that thing on our wrist and our computers, and we have this digital time. And then we were even joking before that a lot of people who are on tech the whole time are starting to sound like podcasts turned up to about 1.25. They speak really quickly, and they're sort of like become, they've adopted this mechanical time. So I think that is part of it. And often when I'm talking to patients, and I see quite a lot of people with mental health problems, and I'm like, listen, we can't just fix this like your phone, right? You go to the phone place, my screen's broken, fixed in 30 minutes, and you come back and you're like, why not? Wasn't ready yet. And I'm like, all right, this is a bit of a job for the next 6 months. Think of it more like a tree growing or something like that. So I think there's something very beautiful about the contemplative practices of various sorts that brings us back to the breath and the sounds and the natural flow of time. So I agree. Yeah.
And Joe, you do a lot of work with young people. What impact do you see technology having on the young people that you work with, particularly kids that have in trauma and things?
Yeah, so I guess my go-to with when working with young people who are impacted by their behaviours or have challenging behaviours in the classroom and or in community, the first thing that I do with them is meditation. Like the absolute key things that I do, and that's the most repetitive thing. So whilst if I'm working with a group at the moment where we will do some different cultural practice each week, and if we go across a 10-week program, then we might do something different each week, and
But
then
the
recycle
meditation's
that.
like
But the
standard.
meditation is every week. Whilst it started as 2 minutes, then 5 minutes, to now getting these kids sitting in a meditative process for 25 minutes.
Wow! And what
Kids
sort of
that can't sit still in their classroom.
what sort of changes do you see over that 10-week period when you do that training with those kids?
So everything slows down.
Yeah.
Everything slows down. These kids are walking into classroom, and we probably underestimate the impact of what it has, particularly with kids that who have experienced significant trauma from a young age, even not just the big, as we say, the big capital T's, like the child rearing processes that are completely against the evolution of how we've been as humans. We're seeing kids walk into classrooms in a highly alerted state, and they're walking to the corner shop and they're getting cans of Red Bull and lollies between the ages of 5 and 12 before they even walk into the classroom. And then we're going,
Wonder why they
what's
can't
going on
sit
with
still.
these kids? Why can't they sit still? Yeah, and then we're seeing teachers, like we're seeing behaviours like we haven't seen before, and we're seeing teachers who are being triggered by these behaviours and can't regulate themselves, and then re-triggering these different kids. So it's a massive cycle that we're seeing then. But everything that I do with the consistency with the work and the programs that I do is having that meditation at the start to then just get them. It's like a reset, right?
Fantastic.
We're going to stop and do this, and we're just going to slow everything down. And then the impact that the teachers are seeing when they get back to class, they're like, it's a different kid that left. Which is getting them to, if it's an extra 5 minutes or an extra 10 minutes that they're paying attention, that's 5 or 10 minutes that they didn't get.
Exactly. One thing I wanted to ask, and I'll start asking Susan, how do we strike a balance between a world that wants sort of instant gratification with these shortened attention span versus delaying rewards? How do we recognise the benefit of delayed rewards when it comes to things like contemplative practice, where you might not see, like Joe works with these kids for 10 weeks, so they might not see the full benefits for 10 weeks. How do we put the effort in to get the rewards in a society where everyone wants the quick fix? Everyone wants something fixed in 10 minutes or less.
Yeah, it is very countercultural, isn't it? I think we have never been in a time that is changing as fast as it is now. That's a documented fact. Things have never, we live in a globalized world where things have never changed as quickly as they are. And you can see that we, as humans, not just as individuals, but as a society, we are struggling to keep up with the changes we're seeing, which I think explains some of the conflicts that we're seeing and the tensions within our society. So how do we sort of accept the need to not always have instant gratification? It's very difficult because we live in a society where that's everything. You have a headache, take a Panadol. You're thirsty, have a drink. You want something, get it on Uber delivery. Like, why wait? Everything's now. I want a date, I'll go on Tinder, see who's there.
If you don't like that one, you swipe to the next one.
Yeah, you want to watch, turn on Netflix, look what's on. Remember when you and I were young, we used to have to wait and just see what's on TV at 8:30. And if you don't like it, tough luck, that's all there is. There was one TV and your parents got the say and that was it. And so I think, it is very difficult to think of anything really now which we cannot have on demand if we want it. The tricky thing is, though, is that we need to ask ourselves, what of value can be achieved through instant gratification? It's actually very difficult to think of anything. You look at the natural world, nothing in the natural world happens instantly. Plants don't grow, babies don't grow, the universes aren't created, stars aren't born or live or die. Like, everything
worthwhile
is
takes
just
time.
Like gardening is the ultimate lesson in delayed gratification. You cannot force a carrot to grow any faster than it will grow. And so and it's not just, in the natural world, but we also see within ourselves our own growth, our own knowledge. A PhD, you cannot get that instantly. You will have to do the 3.5 years of work to get that, whether you like it or not. And so I think if we can start to accept that we've kind of been sold a lie, that instant gratification, I want it now, so it must be good. And if we can break that connection in our minds and say, well, just because I want it now and I can have it now doesn't mean that that is the right choice. That very old idea that between stimulus and response, there is a space. And we can go into that space and go, hang on a minute, what do I want to do with this? And I feel really sad that even these, beautiful contemplative practices that have existed, for millennia in so many traditions, obviously particularly in the Indigenous tradition, so many spiritual traditions. I think it's wonderful that we can see the benefit that if we do contemplative practices, we might be more productive at work, for example. And I think that is a nice unintended side effect, but I feel very sad when I see that even contemplative practices have been co-opted by capitalism to try to make us better workers. It's nice if that can be a side effect, but it should never be the point. And yet somehow we are now in a world where our workplaces will say to us, sorry to hear that you're stressed at work. How about if you take your lunch break, where you would normally get to have a sandwich and stare at the wall, come and do a meditation class, because then we think you'll be more productive for us. And that should handle your stress and your overwork, and then you can actually do a 10-hour day for us. There's something wrong with that.
Definitely.
We should be able to say there is a problem with this equation instead of just accepting the premise.
Definitely. And Grant, I was interested, can you share with the audience your concept of high discipline, high freedom, and also your concept of the not to-do list, which I really like?
Yeah, so again, I'm fiercely agreeing with you.
Yeah, microphone.
I'm fiercely agreeing with you here, Susan. I really agree with that. And there's a bit of a joker in the pack, and I sit at the clinic all the time because, there are many wealthy, we're all wealthy in Australia pretty much by historical standards, but, uber wealthy people who, they're miserable, right? They can have anything they want, and we all live like kings, as you said, Netflix, Uber Eats, whatever you want. And here's the joker in the pack, you need friction in your life. Anything worthwhile actually needs a bit of work on it. And if it's all just flowing too easily, it becomes sort of hollow and meaningless. So a couple of things that I've found helpful, which is to have this slight paradox of high discipline, high freedom. What do I mean by that? So I've tried to have a high-ish discipline in my life with all my various habits. I quite like that atomic habits guy, although it goes a bit too far in my view. But the idea of routines and and working towards things as they go. For me, it might be learning saxophone and just doing the scales every day until I get good over 10 years, Actually, I'm in a jazz band with a guy over here who's trying not to look at me. He actually makes beautiful contemplative music, by the way, Giddy Fickin, at our sister department in Monash. Anyway, bit of a plug. It's amazing. But anything worthwhile, or Tai Chi, it's taken 10 years. I'm still only up to the third moves, right? And I'm like, to my friend who teaches me, I'm like, in the meantime, she's become a stunt woman and had 2 more children. and I'm still going, where does the sword go again? So anything worthwhile takes time. I also love the idea of a not-to-do list. So I'm very organised with how disciplined I am, but then that gives me a lot of freedom because I've got a lot of spare energy and time to do the things that actually matter to me. And I have a not-to-do list, which is a really fun thing to do. And I always get confused with metaphor or analogy. But anyway, the story that I think about is it's like getting the weeds out of the garden. Like, what are all the things I'm going to not do? Is that an analogy? Oh, thanks. This is good. I've been trying to sort this out for
A
ages.
metaphor is something, an analogy is like something.
Isn't
There
that
you
simple?
go.
Okay. So these are like the weeds that you get out of the garden. And suddenly I've got much more time to read good books, listen to good podcasts, read good books about Aboriginal astronomy, because I refuse to go down the plug hole of social media. I have it off all my devices. It's easy.
I know. I tried to find you on Instagram, but I couldn't find you.
No, what I do is on Sunday between 9 and 10 a.m. It's a bit obsessive. I have a coffee. I do all my social media, tell all my friends how great they are, like, post a weird video of me playing saxophone, and then turn it off and don't look till the next week at 9
Wow,
a.m.
that's good discipline.
And I don't need it. I haven't missed anything. All that time I'm reading beautiful books, listening to good podcasts, and I haven't missed a thing. The only thing is you can get a bit out of touch because I don't really understand TikTok and
but I don't
really want to, I don't think.
It's a big time waster, in my view.
So anyway, to just round that off, it's absolutely not by accident that our tiny primate brains are completely losing to technology. There's a whole field of science called persuasive technology, and there are much smarter supercomputers pointed at your head, working out what thing will keep you hooked on that screen. So if our attention is who we are, someone else is stealing it.
Thanks. Thank you, Grant.
Metaphorically speaking, as an analogy.
Joe, I'm interested. A lot of people are becoming interested in their relationships with alcohol, whether they are fully alcohol-free or what they call sober curious, which I love that. Sober curious just means basically you're investigating what life would look like without alcohol. So, and I mean, I'm someone that's given up alcohol, and I'm interested in you sharing with the audience how, or if contemplative practices or your traditions have helped in your journey of sobriety, and how the audience might be looking for, if they're looking at their own relationships with alcohol, how contemplative practice might fit in with not replacing alcohol, but for me, one of the reasons I wanted to give up alcohol was because I knew if I drank alcohol the next morning, I wouldn't want to get up and do any movement and do anything that was good for my body. It just was counterintuitive. And so that was me saying I'm prioritising the standard of wanting to move my body more than drinking alcohol. I mean, everyone has different reasons. But for you, how did contemplative practice fit in with you? Was it a part of getting sober for you?
I think so many people who struggle in the grasp of addiction and or using substance excessively are caught in a trap of trying to escape. And we need to ask ourselves what we're escaping rather than the need to escape, right? So what I guess I got sober at the height of my NRL career, where it was a challenge, because that space is all about party and good times and play hard, drink hard, party hard sort of vibe, which I loved being the centre of that. But for me, it was a really, I just had a bit of a moment where I was like, everything that's happening that's in my life that's problematic, there's one common theme, and it's alcohol. For me, I walked away from that life. It's 18 years in December, and without doubt in the world, the lights turned on. But I guess hindsight's a wonderful thing. Without doubt in the world as well, the noise went up.
Yes.
So I needed to start to have a look at what it was that was so loud between my ears that needed me to escape. And I think, like, there's two very different parts of my life. So I've always known that I was an Aboriginal guy. I didn't quite particularly know what it was like to be one, because I grew up where it wasn't. We always knew that we were, but it was said, you know that you are. You don't need to profess it to everyone that you are. You know who you are. Be comfortable in that, right? Paraphrasing, and it was during those times that I guess I was caught in a system of professional sport where you're not particularly authentic to who you are. And anyone who's in those systems, I would challenge if they are, because they have to fit to a certain narrative. And if you don't fit to that narrative, you're gone. And I was completely inauthentic to who I actually was. And then when I got time to be sober and I moved away from the life of sport, it then allowed me to connect with culture and who I was. And then it was like, this is everything that I've been missing. It was like the jigsaw puzzle that wasn't
missing
there,
piece for you.
right? But then, like, the longer you get into it, and again, I'm not saying that I'm recently identified or anything like that. It's not what I'm saying. I'm saying the cultural practices that our old people have been doing for thousands of years, connecting to that stuff. I'm not just talking about going out and, dancing half naked in the bush. It's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about connecting to the old stories and the values of what those stories are, and the responsibility of carrying those stories, and what you have to community and your family when you have those stories. How does that impact your behaviour? So, two very different parts of my life. I wasn't present a great deal during my sports career. I will say, as a rugby league player, when the voices in my head were silent, when the noise inside my head was silent, was when I was on the field. And you look back and you go, wow, because that was when I was present.
Yep.
In a boxing ring, if you're not present, there's every chance I wouldn't be sitting here with teeth in my head. Right? You've got to be present in that moment of what you're doing, the concentration of what that brings, because you're trying to avoid punches. Right? So the only time then that I was present was actually when I was doing the actual sport. Everything away from that was when I was out partying and up to no good. And then, indulging in different behaviours that weren't particularly productive and or healthy for who I was authentically am. So post-career of that sort of stuff, and you can, I can now go and sit in the bush because I live out in Dubbo, so I can in New South Wales. So the old bush TV, sit around the fire and all the world's problems disappear.
Oh, it sounds
Right?
so
So you
good.
can sit there for hours and do that and just have conversations and you go, wow, like a couple of hours have gone past, where if I was doom scrolling on social media, which I won't sit up here for 1 minute and say that I don't do that, because I do that far too much. And maybe I need to go scuba diving. But it's the practices of what we do is all about presence. And again, like the relationship with loneliness and the relationships with living in the future with our head and the connection that has to anxiety and you know, that's why old people never had problems with anxiety, because they didn't worry about what was going on up there. They just sat now and worried about what we had to do and the purpose of what we were doing.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you for sharing all that. One thing I wanted to ask Susan was about the interconnectedness of contemplative practice and social justice causes, and if we are involved in social justice causes, and how do we make sure we keep our egos in check and that it's not all about us and becomes very sort of self-focused, and that we're actually still remembering that the greater good?
Yeah, it's something I think about a lot. One of the subjects I teach at uni actually is social movements and social change, and it's really interesting to watch what social movements look like now and what defines them compared to, say, you know, the civil rights movement and how they're different. And, you know, there are some key differences that are good that we see now. And social media has absolutely helped with that. Absolutely, social media, that is one area where I say it has been a good thing. We hear from people that otherwise we wouldn't have been able to hear from because they were being kept out from sharing the message. We see in certain places where social media has caused and saved revolutions against oppressive governments. So it definitely plays a role in that regard. But I guess one of the things that I see when I look at social movements today, particularly the ones that exist very much online, is that I see that we are very quick to point the finger outwards, and very, very rarely do we ever stop and reflect on ourselves. Well, very rarely do we even stop and reflect, first of all, before we post that angry comment or that performative post about our own value and our own beliefs. But we are so quick to criticize others. There is no sense of grace, there is no sense of generosity, there is no sense of benefit of the doubt. And I'm not talking, and it's so interesting when I say that, people are like, well, what about Nazis? And it's so interesting that is the first place that we go to. What I'm talking about is that person that you maybe know or don't know that has maybe not just posted something you think they should be posting in this crucial moment in time. It's a cause that you care about. And instead of being like, wow, silence is violence, just stopping and thinking, well, what could be a generous read of what's happening there? Maybe they're like you and they're not on social media. They're there one day a week, and by the time the week's gone, he's already missed his opportunity to post that necessary tile. Maybe that person, instead of posting a tile on their social media, is actually doing something meaningful, is out doing something in the real world and engaging in protest or talking to people or whatever it is. I think we are so quick to point the finger at other people, and so rarely do we ask ourselves before we say something, am I saying this with ego? Am I sure that my own intentions here are absolutely pure? Am I certain that there is no more generous read of what this person is doing before I attack them? Attack is our first act instead of being what should be the last one. Before we have tried to understand, before we've given the benefit of the doubt, before we've tried to talk to the person, all these other things. And I think there is a real... there is an illness in that. I think there is a spiritual illness, and it's because I think if we bring it back to contemplative practices, if we are spending enough time holding ourselves to account and really reckoning with ourselves and saying, you know, where did I fall short today? If every day we're like, okay, where did I fall short? And holding myself to account. If I died tonight, would I feel good about the way I spoke to that person, the judgment I made of that person? Could have I let that thing slide? Could have I had a more generous read of that person? Could have I given more of myself? Could have I shut up? Even if I was right, did I need to say that? And I think if we engage in that and call ourselves to account before we call other people to account, I think that it doesn't deaden the social... I think we're worried that if we're not calling other people out enough, that social justice will die. I think it will be a much more purified and effective form of social justice, because we're dealing with we're so quick to point out the tyrants outside that we're not looking at the tyrants inside. And they are just as real, and in fact can be even more insidious than the ones outside us.
Beautifully put. Please thank our panel, Dr. Grant Blashki, Dr. Susan Carland and Joe Williams. Thank you so much for being here.